we have to be under no illusions of what is going on because obviously we had the spending review, and it was quite frankly very clear that Rishi Sunak uh, is going to really crash the economy. I think Brexit will be what does that. And we are looking at, if people thought the last decade was bad, the next decade is going to be even worse. And I think even if you get a Labour government in, they may be able to sort out some of this mess, but it ain't going to be easy. It ain't going to be easy at all. Um, so, and we're just going to go over this because we are in an absolute economic recession at the moment. This is what people don't seem to acknowledge. It's spoken of very little, but we are in a recession. We are one of the only countries in Europe that took such a significant harder hit than any other country in Europe. And what was different about us? We have this thing going on called Brexit. And that is adding to our recession in ways that we just can't imagine. And trust me, economists are going to be looking back at this, and I'm looking forward to reading and going over what their reports and their studies are finding. It's going to be make for fantastic content on this channel, I can guarantee that. But we are in a situation where a lot of businesses, because of COVID, just either haven't survived and have had to close their doors, or have just managed to hang on by the skin of the teeth. And as a result, we've got something very clear we're going to go through now on politics.co.uk with their article on this, because Ian Dunn, once again, gets it completely right. So before we get into that, please do remember to hit that like and share button. Also, apparently it is good to ring that little bell, so give it that ring-a-ding-ding. And yeah, we'll see you soon for more videos, hopefully. But we're not leaving yet. Obviously, go down below and check out my Patreon and my one-off donation link. And thank you very much to the people that do support me. So let's get into the article then. So this comes from politics.co.uk, and the title of the article says it all. Brexit will damage the parts of the economy which survived COVID. It was an extraordinary thing to behold. We've just 37 days until Britain leaves the single market and customs union, the biggest single change in this country's trading status we've seen in 40 years. And yet the Chancellor did not once mention Brexit during his spending review statement to the House of Commons. It was as if it just wasn't even happening. But perhaps he was distracted. The figures released today about the impact of the coronavirus on the British economy was startling. Even if we knew that they were coming, the economy will contract by 11.3% this year, the largest fall in over 300 years. And the economic output is not expected to return to pre-crisis levels until the fourth quarter of 2022. The UK will borrow a total of 394 billion this year, equivalent to just 90% of the GDP. Underlying debt is forecast to continue rising every year, reaching 97.5% of GDP in 2025 and 2026. For a while, Brexiteers in government believed the extraordinary level of hurt the coronavirus inflicted on the economy would have a useful side effect for Brexit. It meant that the damage inflicted by Britain's departure from the EU, either with or without a deal, could be hidden away and overshadowed by the carnage of the pandemic. It seemed to fit with Rishi Sunak's silence today about the end of the transition period. And it is cynical and it is a cynical and irresponsible argument, but it is also false. If you put his speech to one side and instead look at the Office for Budget Responsibilities, or OBR, the economic and fiscal outlook, you can see why. The OBR forecast is not perfect. It seems to treat friction at the border early next year predominantly as a consequence of a no-deal Brexit, and imagines that the deal would lead to a smoother transition. This is not quite right. The government has chosen to leave the customs union and single market, meaning that exporters will face checks for safety and security documentation, custom papers, and in some cases, regulatory compliance. This will apply whether there is a deal or not, as ministers have recently begun to state publicly. But, nevertheless, the report demonstrates that Brexit is not concealed by COVID. It is significantly worsened by it. This is because Brexit affects different parts of the economy to those hit by the virus. During the last year, face-to-face services like hospitality, entertainment and transport were the worst affected. Sectors like manufacturing and financial services were able to defend themselves fairly well by having people work from home or practice social distancing in the workplace. But it is this latter set which is most affected by Brexit. As we lose frictionless access to the EU market, the impact of a no-deal Brexit is largely additive to the same suffered from the coronavirus, the report says. So we have one imposed crisis into another. The report also found that the chaos of COVID could get in the way of government and businesses preparing for the end of the transition. This, of course, was precisely why the government was told to extend the transition period earlier in the year, something it failed to do. Now we see the consequences. Businesses and government have been distracted by the need to deal with the disruption caused by the virus. The OBR found personnel and resources which would have gone towards Brexit were instead diverted to the pandemic, and cash reserves and inventories were run down and making firms a lot more vulnerable to shocks. The OBR forecast that a no-deal Brexit would reduce the real GDP by a further 2% next year. And what's interesting about the forecast is the difference between the short and the long-term effect. The report concludes that the impact of checks at the border will dissipate over the course of the year as businesses get used to the new system. They'll start learning exactly what they need to do to avoid delays, or maybe even find other routes to market that avoid the Dover-Calais border. But the long-term hit to productivity, an area the British economy already struggles with, builds slowly, leaving output at around 1.5% lower than it is in standard forecasts just after 5 years, then continuing to grow from there. That is not just a short-term impact. Brexit leaves permanent scars. The report predicts costs to the economy from heightened uncertainty and tighter credit conditions, lower business investment and reflecting the prospective loss of some export markets, and a rise in structural unemployment as more resources needed to be reallocated from declining to expanding sectors as a result of Brexit. Under a no deal, unemployment would rise above 8% next year. It would delay the point at which Britain returns to its pre-virus outbreak peak. No matter how the economic effects of the pandemic continue to play out, in the worst case scenario, it stretches to the second quarter of 2025, a full 3 years later than under a deal. It is a grim prospectus, which grows some way to explaining why Sunak did not want to talk about it this afternoon. There is, in the end, some truth in the cynical view that COVID could smother the impact of Brexit. The virus does indeed have a bigger effect on the economy, and it is monstrous in what it is doing to us. But then, no one picked COVID. No one was responsible for it. Brexit, on the other hand, is a choice, as the decision to leave the customs union and single market, or the refusal to extend the transition. The impact will not be covered up by the pandemic. We will simply be taking those parts of the economy which managed to avoid the damage of the virus and inflicting a completely different kind of economic pain on them, for no discernible reason whatsoever. There you have it once again. It is going to be bad. It is going to be bad. And I take, I said this last week on the Good Morning Walk. It's going to be bad for a lot of people, and a lot of these Brexiteers were, making promises that they just can't deliver on. And when you talk to Brexit supporters, they generally have a serious delusion, and because of the lies that were fed to them by these con men Brexiteers, that things are somehow going to be better. And there are people on this channel who will say, on one videos will come on and say, oh no, it's all about economics, and then other videos, when we go over stuff like this, will say, oh no, you don't understand, it's all about sovereignty. And then when we cover stuff about sovereignty, like the fact that the Japan deal forces on us less, destroys our privacy regulations that we've had, they've got nothing to say on that. So there is no chart. It's just an never-ending goalpost shifting maneuver, and you can't run from facts. And sooner or later, these facts and figures are going to catch up. And what's most funny about, well, I don't even want to call it funny, but what's most really perturbing about all this is you have Michael Gove, who spent 4 years saying that all these predictions from these experts were just flat out wrong about Brexit. They were wrong. We're fed up of experts. We don't want to listen to them. And now, because of the coronavirus, he's now turning around saying that we have to listen to these experts and, pay attention to them. You cannot be reasonable and just say, we're going to listen to one type of expert because, I agree with them, but I'm not going to listen to other types of experts because I don't like what they say. And that's the unfortunate, bizarre situation that we're in. But there we go. There we go. But anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Please do hit that like and share button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link. And thank you very much to the people that do support me. And as always, see you all next time.